Hello, and welcome to the House of Law. Tonight, we begin with a tale that stretches far beyond the reach of any written word. Before books, before cities, before spoken language as we know it, we drift back to a time when the sky was the oldest storyteller, and among its countless luminaries, one small red shimmer stood out in the darkness. Mars, a quiet red beacon, glowing gently in the night sky. Tonight, we begin our gentle journey through the ancient observations of this mysterious wanderer. I invite you to like, subscribe, or share the House of Law whenever you're ready. Drifting in and out of sleep is always welcome here. Let's begin. Long before telescopes, before star charts, and far before spacecraft, people looked up from quiet fires, from the edges of forests, from open deserts and high mountain valleys, and there it was, Mars. Not the brightest, not the largest, the stories that flickered behind early eyes, and the questions that came from watching that soft rust color move across the heavens. If you enjoy this calm exploration, but always unmistakable, a reddish point of light, neither blinking nor streaking, just glowing, steadily, night after night, it was unlike the stars that held fast to their places. Because Mars drifted, changing its position slowly over weeks, across the deep sky. Ancient sky watchers noticed this wandering behavior, and they gave names. In Greece, it would be Ares. In Babylon, it was Nergal. To the Romans, it became Mars. Each name, each story, was different, but all began with the same observation. That silent red light that shifted quietly among the constellations. The planets were called wanderers, moving where stars stayed still, and among them, Mars always seemed the most unusual. Its rusty hue set it apart, a quiet ember smoldering in the deep blue fabric of night. Some cultures thought Mars was a god of fire. Others saw it as a harbinger, a signal. But at first, it was simply a mystery. What was this red star that did not behave like the others? The sky was seen as a storybook for these early peoples, and every light, every movement carried meaning. In Mesopotamia, long before Greek thinkers named the planets, scholars looked skyward from ziggurats and sandstone courtyards. They recorded Mars on clay tablets, watching its progress step by step. To them, the heavens reflected the actions of gods and kings. If Mars glowed brightly, or lingered too long in one place, it might have meant something more than just a wandering point of light. It might have meant war, or a shift in power. It might have whispered omens of events still hidden in time. But night after night, beyond prediction or fear, Mars was simply there, shining gently above forests, deserts, and rivers. In ancient China, Mars had its own name, Yinghua, the fire star. Sky-watching officials tracked it carefully, not just for science, but to align earthly happenings with celestial order. The people revered the stars because they were constant, yet here was Mars, a flame in the dark that changed. And yet, it never vanished. It returned to the same parts of the sky every few years, a familiar light, neither friend nor foe, only distant, patient, and somehow always watching. In the stillness of a clear night, you can imagine what it must have felt like. To see that dim red light rise over the horizon, to know it by no name, yet still to know it, to feel the hush of the world settle around it. The stars sparkle and flicker. But Mars holds steady. A presence, not a decoration. It didn't shout. But it was never silent either. The people before mathematics, before geometry, before the notion of orbit and atmosphere, it was known through watching. Long, patient, humble watching. And in that simple recognition, a silent relationship began between the Earth and her neighboring ember in the sky, long before telescopes gazed into the dark tapestry of night. The crimson glimmer of Mars stirred the minds of ancient peoples. To the Romans, Mars was not merely a distant light in the sky. They knew only what they could see, and what they saw was a red wanderer who kept returning. And so Mars became a part of the sky's rhythm, like tides, like seasons, not always there, but never truly gone. He was one of their mightiest gods, a figure of strength, discipline, and sacred ancestry. Mars stood just behind Jupiter in the Roman pantheon, revered as the god of war, but also of agriculture in older times. A protector, a father figure, and something of a paradox, fierce in spirit, and yet vital to peace through strength. He was a patron of Rome itself, believed to be the father of Romulus and Remus, the twins who founded the great city. So, Mars was seen not only as a bringer of conflict, but also as the source of civilization's birth. Temples rose in his honor, especially the grand temple of Mars Altor, the Avenger, which stood in the Forum of Augustus. It wasn't just a place of offering, but a symbol of Rome's destiny, guided by Mars's resolve and strength, while his Greek counterpart Ares was often depicted as reckless, even disliked. Mars was admired as noble, controlled, devoted to the just cause of war. And in this, we see how gods reflect not only the skies, but the souls of the cultures beneath them. In the Greek world, Mars was called Ares, a very different figure, less tempered, more raw and fiery. Ares was passion unbound, a spirit of bloodshed and glory, not always welcomed by the more measured Olympians. He was often at odds with Athena, the goddess of strategy and wisdom in war. Where Athena was chosen, Ares was endured. Even so, he represented an inescapable truth, that war is part of life, and through him, the Greeks gave face to both its terror and allure. He carried with him a dual nature, fire and fever on one side, judge and sovereign of the dead on the other. Nergal's story echoes through ancient tablets, in hymns and omens. His association with Mars likely came from the planet's color, that ruddy glare, like the coals of a distant flame. Among the Egyptians, Mars was sometimes linked to the god Set, a force of chaos and storms. Set, too, was a god of conflict, but with more complex shades, protector of Ra on his journey through the night sky, and still a symbol of violence and disorder. To them, the red planet was not just a body, it was a sign, an influence that could mark the rise of nations, or their fall. Astrology wove these meanings into the language of the stars. For centuries, astrologers studied the motion of Mars, charted its retrograde paths, and translated its presence into messages about desire, courage, and aggression. Mars in your chart, some would say, points toward action, toward our drive to act, to conquer, to defend what we care about. And in every culture, those qualities were both admired and feared. Farther east, the Babylonians watched the same red star climb the heavens. To them, Mars was known as Nergal, a god not only of war, but of plague and the underworld. Even as our understanding grew, and we learned that Mars was a world of dust and valleys and ice, that symbolism remained, a mirror of the fire inside us all. Not so long ago, when the skies were still clear of electric haze, and stargazing meant kneeling in the grass, it was Mars that drew eyes again and again. So Mars, the god, the star, the planet, has always carried a certain weight, not just as a symbol of battle, but as something deeper, primal, eternal. The Red Wanderer, distinct in color, unblinking and restless in its path. To the early sky watchers, Mars was unlike the distant, steady stars. While constellations drifted slowly and predictably, Mars seemed to stray. This strange behavior became known as retrograde motion, a puzzling grace note among the planetary dance. Night after night, devoted observers noted its position, sketching it against the background stars, patient hands tracing its erratic choreography. To the unaided eye, this movement was subtle, but unmistakable over time. It wandered backwards on occasion, stuttering across the heavens, looping, as if unsure of its own direction. The Red Wanderer would move steadily in one direction, then slow, pause, and, for a few nights, reverse course. Each time it returned to forward motion, it resumed along the same celestial track, as though the sky itself had gently corrected a wandering guest. The model of Earth as the universe's unmoving heart still reigned. A comforting, centered theory, championed by Ptolemy in the 2nd century, to explain Mars and its wandering path. Ptolemy introduced a concept called the epicycle. Picture this: a planet not just orbiting the Earth, but also looping in a smaller circle as it traces a larger circle around us. A wheel within a wheel, carefully tuned. But even then, something never quite fit. As centuries passed, generations of astronomers inherited Ptolemy's sky, a nested ballet of motion and mathematics. Each theory, each refinement, brought the stars and planets into sharper focus. But Mars continued to whisper of a deeper pattern. Ancient astronomers sought answers. How could a planet appear to defy the natural order? It was a clever answer, one that fit the math, at least for a time. With enough epicycles and adjustments, the model could predict Mars's position with useful precision. Without the help of telescopes, observers trusted their instincts, their records, and their sleepless nights beneath the sky. Even in confusion, there was reverence. Each moment, Mars wavered or reversed. It reminded early watchers that the cosmos held secrets still. And so, they returned to their parchments and open-air towers, drawing arcs, timing risings, measuring each delay in its dance. Patiently, waiting for the red trickster to yield its truth. Mars, glimmering with its rusty hue, has always caught the eye of those who dared to look up and wonder. For Johannes Kepler, it became a puzzle he could not ignore. Kepler had inherited something rare, a treasure trove of celestial data from the meticulous Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. Brahe, with his keen eye and custom instruments, had charted the skies without the aid of a telescope. They knew the stars like neighbors, and they could spot when one behaved oddly. Mars was a familiar guest, but always slightly unpredictable, a challenge for the mind, and a mystery for the soul. He was exacting in his measurements, recording the wanderings of Mars with greater precision than any before him. When Kepler joined Brahe in Prague, he didn't yet know just how challenging this work would be, nor did he realize the trail it would set him upon. Mars did not behave like the others. Its orbit seemed inconsistent, not following the neat circles that earthbound theories had insisted were divine truth. The ancient belief was that the planets moved in perfect circles, nested within crystal spheres. This was, for centuries, the comforting structure of the cosmos. Yet Mars defied it. Kepler, patient but relentless, dove into Brahe's data. For years he tested model after model, trying to match the observed positions of Mars with the rigid circles of past thinkers. But none fit perfectly. The difference was a mere 8 arcminutes, a slender sliver in the sky, just a whisper of deviation. But to Kepler, that whisper was everything. He began to suspect that nature might not be ruled by perfect geometry, but by something more subtle, something more real. The mind of Mars, the path it carved in the heavens, spoke of imperfection that was, perhaps, more truthful than perfection. The boldness of the idea was balanced by the quiet support of Brahe's numbers. Every mark, every measurement he had left behind became the proof. And Mars, with its stubborn path, was the key to unlocking it all. Kepler's first law, born from this long contemplation, declared planetary paths as elliptical, not circular. In time, Kepler would propose a daring idea that the planets did not move in circles, but ellipses, ovals, with the sun resting off-center at one of 2 foci. It was gentle, simple even, but it shattered centuries of thought. It was a theory distilled from patience, curiosity, and the orbit of a red planet. Kepler didn't stop there. He understood, slowly, that this shape meant speed would also change across the orbit. This became his second yaw, that a line joining a planet to the sun sweeps out equal areas in equal times. A delicate dance, slow at the wider ends, swift when closer to the sun. It is humbling how one planet could hold such secrets, and how 2 minds, one precise with instruments, the other quiet with math and insight, could together reveal a deeper harmony among the stars. Galileo's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the telescope atop a wooden platform, the gentle creak of its frame barely noticed beneath the night sky. He turned the lens toward what had once been only pinpricks of light. Tonight, he chose Mars. Before the telescope, people had seen Mars only as a reddish star in the heavens, unmoving in its brightness, but curious in its hue. Now, through magnified glass, Galileo found something different. Not just a light, but a body. It explained what observers had puzzled over for generations. And Mars, once so troublesome, had now led the way to revelation. It was the year 69, and though telescopes were still a novel idea, Galileo looked through the instrument with a sense of quiet wonder, round, defined, and subtly colored, like a coin edged in soft flame. It no longer danced like a jewel on a curtain of black. It drifted with form and presence. This was the beginning of something new. The planets were no longer beyond approach, beyond shape, beyond study. In those early observations, Galileo couldn't see craters or channels, Mars appeared as a disk, small but distinct. That shift from a speck to a physical sphere kindled something in the human mind, a desire to see more, to know more. The heavens had always inspired wonder, but now they invited questions. What was on Mars? Did it turn as Earth did? Could it have seas or lands or something stranger still? Galileo's notebook recorded nothing extravagant, no great claims, no grand conclusions, just humble marks and sketched curves. But the implication was profound. Mars could be seen and known. The lens that brought the moons of Jupiter to view now hinted that Mars too had secrets. In later years, astronomers across Europe repeated Galileo's work. Each telescope revealed a little more, depending on how well it was crafted and how steady the eye behind it was. Some thought they noticed bright and dark patches on Mars's face. Others wondered if those changes were movement, rotation, or cloud. The line between imagination and observation was delicate, but something important was happening. The concept of celestial cartography had begun. To map the planets was unthinkable before this era. But now, with some certainty, observers could begin to say, there was a shape, a pattern, to that distant world. It wasn't long before the simple lens became a path for explorers of another kind. Explorers who charted without ships, without sails or anchors. But with patience, ink, and time, Mars became not just a light in the sky, but a place with form. And every blurry detail magnified in those early scopes offered the promise of something more, as if behind the shimmer, behind the blur, lay a world waiting to be seen. In the quiet end of the 19th century, men of science turned their instruments toward Mars. One such man was Giovanni Schiaparelli, an Italian astronomer, working in the still silence of an observatory dome. As he peered through his telescope, Mars revealed itself through lenses and air currents, red, dry, crosshatched with strange lines. The work had only just begun. He called them canales. It simply meant channels in his native Italian, something natural, like rivers or grooves, formed by the forces of time and geology. But when the word crossed oceans and slipped into English ears, it transformed. Canales became canals, narrow strips carved not by nature, but by minds and hands. And suddenly, the red planet was no longer just a world of dust and plains. It became, in the thoughts of many, a place of builders, cities perhaps, a people who dug great irrigation lines to sweep water from the polar ice to the thirsty equator. Among those most devoted to this vision was Percival Lowell, a wealthy man, a philosopher, and above all, a dreamer in love with the stars. Lowell built his own observatory, nestled under the wide skies of Arizona. And night after night he watched. He too saw the lines, dozens of them, crossing and recrossing the planet's face. They seemed to appear and disappear with the seasons. Some doubled, some faded and returned. To Lowell, these could only be the work of intelligent life, enduring and vast. He imagined a dying world, carefully husbanding its scarce water, building an intricate web of canals to survive, and if there were canals, there must be engineers, rulers, perhaps even philosophers under those distant skies. The public, caught in the spell of Lowell's books and lectures, was enchanted. Mars was no longer just a planet. It was a mirror for our own hopes and fears, our engineering pride, and our wistful wonder at being not alone. Newspapers printed illustrations of Martian cities. Children lay on blankets beneath the stars and listened to tales of silent towers and crimson deserts. Writers, artists, and even early filmmakers began to imagine this distant civilization in detail. It became part of our lore, woven into bedtime stories, and the quiet hum of idle speculation. But, even as the story grew in beauty and complexity, not all agreed with Lowell. Other astronomers could not see the canals, and some believed they were illusions, tricks of light and shadow, artifacts of imperfect optics, or simply the mind's yearning for pattern. Yet the debate itself became part of the mystery. Why did one person see lines etched across a foreign world, while another saw none at all? Such is the fragile thread between what we observe and what we believe we see, between the image in the eye and the story in the heart. Perception is not passive. It fills the gaps, it shapes and colors what enter through our senses. It dreams between the stars, and sometimes the dreams tell us more about ourselves than about what lies beyond. Lowell died believing in his Martian canals, and though no spacecraft has since found them, the vision lingers softly, etched into old maps and older memories, an echo of a time when the cosmos felt just a little closer, a little more like home. The picture of Mars that began to take root in human minds during the late 19th and early 20th centuries was not one of dust and silence, but one of mystery, intelligence, and shadowed warnings. Of all the voices to speak of Mars in that era, few echoed louder than the calm and calculating pen of H.G. Wells. He gave us The War of the Worlds in 1898, a novel that would fall like a whispered storm over the cultural imagination. In its pages, Mars was no longer a scientific curiosity or a distant red light in the heavens. It was home to an alien race, ancient, calculating, and desperate. They invaded Earth not out of hatred, but of need. A planet dying, a people looking elsewhere for survival. Wells did not describe his Martians with malice, but with the cold detachment of nature. In his tale, we see not only a science fiction story, but a mirror held up to the age in which he lived, an era of empire, of technological conquest, and of nations spreading beyond their boundaries. To some, the Martians seemed a metaphor for colonizers. To others, a vision of what might happen if humanity itself lost its way. Survival was not a matter of right or wrong, but of inevitability. The war they brought was overwhelming. Cities fell, resistance crumbled, all seemed lost. And yet, in the quiet turning of fate, it was not strength nor weaponry that saved us, but the tiny, invisible organisms of Earth itself, bacteria against which the Martians had no defense. In that theme, Wells planted a gentle seed of humility, that even the greatest powers, cosmic or earthly, may fall before the smallest elements of life. This story stirred minds across the world. It was more than fiction. It was a kind of dream. Readers began to imagine Mars not just as a planet, but as a place filled with stories, with cities, voices, and struggles like our own. And soon, the red planet was no longer silent. The decades that followed brought more and more stories of Mars. It became a home for lost civilizations, for canals and machines, and for creatures both strange and hauntingly familiar. writers wove tapestries of Martian lore, not always grounded in science, but deeply rooted in wonder. The effect rippled outward into new forms of media. In 1938, a crackle on the radio gave birth to one of the most memorable moments in Martian storytelling. Orson Welles, with his Mercury Theatre on the Air, adapted The War of the Worlds for radio. Many listeners, hearing the new style format, believed the invasion was real. For a brief moment on that October night, Mars felt close enough to touch, close enough to fear. Though the panic was later exaggerated, its power as a cultural moment cannot be denied. It revealed something tender about the human heart, its openness to wonder, its readiness to fill silence with meaning. By the time the early radio waves faded into memory, Mars had become more than a world. It had become a childhood of the imagination, a place whose possibilities danced in every telescope lens, every science fiction tale, every quiet musing on what lies beyond. The red desert now held footprints left only by thought. Stories gave us pyramids in the sand, echoes of ancient wars, and cities that glowed beneath domes of glass. Martians were not always invaders. Sometimes they were wise and kind, shepherding knowledge across the void. At other times, they were lonely travelers, seeking kinship. Each tale told less about Mars and more about Earth. Our hopes, our fears, and the quiet yearning to not be alone in the universe. In looking to the red planet, writers found a quiet space to speak, to wonder aloud, and to dream without borders. In the 1960s, while astronauts prepared to step into orbit, other pioneers were also being launched into the unknown, not made of skin and bone, but of wires and steel. Earth's first robotic explorers, sent to drift through the silent vacuum, carried with them a quiet determination to watch, to listen, and for the first time to really see what Mars was. The night sky has always whispered stories, but for most of history, those stories were shaped by wonder more than knowledge. Mars was a hazy dot of red, a god of war, a destination wrapped in myth and mystery. But then came the age of machines. It was the Mariner missions that dared to approach. Mariner 4 was launched in 1964, intended for a brief flyby. It traveled more than 500 million kilometers to pass silently by the red planet. No one was sure what it would find. Some hoped for signs of life. Others feared sterility. When Mariner 4 finally drew near, its small onboard camera began to send back images, relayed through radio signals, pixel by pixel, a slow and quiet unveiling. It was not the lush world some had pictured. No canals, no vegetation, just a cold, cratered landscape reminiscent of the moon. And yet, even in its barrenness, there was beauty. A planet shaped by wind and time. The photos were grainy by today's standards, but to the eyes of 1960s scientists, they were a revelation. The mythical Mars began to fade, and a scientific Mars began to emerge. What had once only been imagined through telescopes was now carved into photographic reality. Smooth plains, jagged ridges, impacts long frozen in silence. Each feature quietly whispered. A history, still hidden, still waiting. While Mariner 4 passed and continued on into emptiness, its success inspired more missions. Mariner 6 and 7 in 1969 followed the same pattern: fly past, capture, transmit. They focused on different parts of the planet, the southern hemisphere, ridges and plains. Together, they began piecing together a fuller portrait of Mars. Not just a dead world, perhaps, but one with a past. One that could be studied, explored, understood. Mariner 9, in 1971, would go a step further. It became the first spacecraft to orbit another planet. Weeks passed, the storm subsided, and what emerged from beneath the dust changed everything. A colossal canyon, Valles Marineris, stretching thousands of kilometers, extinct volcanoes, the largest in the solar system, and channels that looked remarkably like those carved by rivers on Earth. For the first time, the idea that water once shaped the Martian surface felt tangible. While a dust storm raged below, blanketing the Martian surface in a red haze, Mariner 9 waited patiently. These robotic eyes glimpsed a Mars that was not just ancient, but active, once alive in its own way. The house of Mars, long seen through the haze of imagination, began to reveal its true face. Bit by bit, frame by frame, the men and women back on Earth watched in wonder, no longer picturing Martians in fantasy, but instead geology, atmosphere, history frozen in dust and stone. From myth to measurement, from legend to evidence, the Mariner missions were the first real footsteps, taken without touching ground, and in many ways, those first quiet photographs remain among the most extraordinary ever taken, because they brought an entire planet just a little closer to home, in the stillness of a Martian afternoon. A gentle dust settled across the pale red plains, untouched, until 2 sentinels arrived from an ocean away, across the void, from Earth. In the 1970s, NASA launched the Viking program, a pair of spacecraft designed with a singular goal to reach Mars and land safely on its weathered surface. Viking 1 and Viking 2. 2 separate missions. Each carried an orbiter and a lander. The landers, meanwhile, were built to descend, to find their way through thin Martian skies and rest gently on alien soil. On July 20th, 1976, Viking 1 touched down on Chryse Planitia, a broad, flat plain, with a horizon stretching endlessly in all directions. Then, on September 3rd, Viking 2 followed, landing in Utopia Planitia. The orbiters would circle high above, mapping the terrain, studying the atmosphere, and looking for the perfect spot to touch down. In that moment, Earth had reached 2 distant shores. The landers were marvels of engineering, standing on steady legs, with panels outstretched like wings to gather the sun. Each was a quiet observer, taking in the colors of the landscape, the shape of the clouds above, and the gentle drift of sand beneath them. But their most precious work lay within small boxes and tiny scoops. The Viking landers were the first to dig into the Martian soil, to sift it, warm it, and test it for evidence of life. They peered into the dust for what we call biosignatures, subtle chemical hints that might whisper of life. One of the first experiments was called the gas exchange experiment. A soil sample was taken and exposed to a nutrient-rich solution. The third, the pyrolytic release test, exposed soil to carbon dioxide, also tagged, and then heated it to see if organic material became part of the sample. Each test looked for signs, not of living organisms directly, but the faint echoes of chemistry that living things might leave behind. If microbes were present, they might breathe and change the gases in the chamber. The second, known as the labeled release experiment, offered nutrients tagged with radioactive markers, designed to reveal any metabolic processes in the soil. The results were subtle and strange. The gas exchange test found nothing. Quiet chambers, no stirring within, but the labeled release experiment behaved differently. Upon adding the nutrients, there was a sudden change. Yes. Gases evolved. Yes. Suggesting something reactive in the soil. Was it life, or simply chemistry? The Martian soil turned out to be highly oxidizing, UVD filled with perchlorates and other reactive elements that might imitate the processes of life, even without a single living cell. The Viking experiments puzzled scientists for decades. What did they find? Was it evidence of ancient life, or merely the complex truth of unfamiliar soil? Even now, there is no clear answer, but the experiments opened a new window. For the first time, human hands, through remote machines, had lifted dust from a distant world and begun to ask ancient questions. Are we alone? Is life scattered across the stars? Or does it cling only to one blue planet? It reached out, quietly, patiently, and touched the surface. Doused the surface. And for those moments, gazing across the wind-swept plains of Mars, it seemed as if the answer was just under the surface, waiting quietly to be discovered. Aft. After the first waves of excitement around Mars, exploration, there came a time of stillness. Not in the minds of dreamers, nor in the heart of science. Viking did not settle the debate. But it brought us closer. But a pause, quiet and heavy, across the vast perch between Earth and the red planet. The early missions had proven that flight to Mars was possible, but making the journey common, safe, routine, would prove frustratingly complex. Much of it came down to logistics, not only fuel and engineering, but the patience required to wait for brief launch windows, those fleeting moments when planetary alignment gives the most favorable path, and yet months of waiting would be followed by months of drifting through silence. Space is without air, without sound, and so each spacecraft sent to Mars travels in an eternal hush, a hush we cannot hear, but one that weighs heavy on instruments and time. Failures did happen, subtle, sometimes devastating. Communications would go dark. The long, silent years, not marked by dramatic failures, but by the slow grinding of obstacles, just out of reach of solutions, too far to touch, too precious to abandon. Mars has always stood at a teasing distance, close enough to tempt, too far to conquer easily. Mechanical arms would seize, parachutes would deploy too late or not at all. Some landers merely vanished, their fates consumed in the shadows of Mars's atmosphere. There were victories, yes, orbiters circling high above the dust, rovers crawling over ancient rocks, but even those moved at a humble pace. Robots that worked slowly, carefully, like guests in a distant land, trying not to disturb. Between each mission, years would pass, plans made, budgets debated, designs revised. Mars was not only distant in space, but also in our ability to return quickly. Humans did not yet follow where the machines had gone. There were dreams, mountains of them, but dreams weighed down by reality. The Mars voyage isn't only about the launch or the planetary science at the end of the line. There is no arrival on Mars if you cannot survive the getting back, delicate planning. Then, like stitching a long and fragile thread across a vacuum, every error has distance multiplied against it. And so silence settled over periods of time, not because we gave up, but because. Caution became the reigning guide. Mars, in its timeless patience, waited. It's about shielding human bodies from deep space radiation, about carrying enough food, water, and air for a journey that spins out over months, and then multiplies at the thought of return. It does not rush or call loudly. It simply exists. Though the early years of Mars exploration were scattered with setbacks and lost contact, a quiet determination remained beneath the surface. By the 1990s, that determination began to stir once again. A new chapter was unfolding, one less about flags and footsteps, and more about study and understanding. The Mars Global Surveyor launched in 1996, and when it arrived safely in orbit the following year, it signaled something rare and reassuring to planetary scientists across the globe: reliability, steadiness. And most of all, an opportunity. Mars Global Surveyor wasn't sent to land, nor to race ahead of other countries. Instead, it was designed to observe, to circle the red planet patiently, lap after lap, day after day, sending home detailed images, measuring magnetic fields, studying the surface with steady instruments, all humming together in quiet. Orbit. This mission began what would come to feel like a return, not just of spacecraft, but of purpose. The surveyor revealed, through high-resolution images, that Mars was not a static desert of dust. It carried signs of change, possibly even flowing water in its ancient past. Ancient. Channels, layered rocks, minerals that hinted at wetter times. It was like waking a planet up, not from sleep, but from misunderstanding. The orbiter's instruments were marvelous in their quiet work, and the data it gave us expanded our vision. We were not only guessing anymore, we were measuring, mapping, knowing. From the heights of orbit, researchers could now build elevation maps of the surface. They studied slopes, craters, and valleys with unimaginable clarity. Hundreds, then thousands, of images painted a fuller picture. Polar ice caps with spiraled layers, like tree rings, tall dust devils twisting across flat terrain, and the vast scar of Valles Marineris, deeper and longer than Earth's Grand Canyon. The orbiter transformed that distant dot in the night sky into a world we could sketch with precision. It became less of a mystery and more of a neighbor. With each orbit, trust in technology was restored. Confidence began to return to the quiet halls of planetary research labs. And as the 2000s arrived, mission planners dared once more to reach further. Beyond the global surveyor came Mars Odyssey in 2001. Odyssey's instruments included a gamma-ray spectrometer that could detect hydrogen, a way to infer the presence of ice just beneath the Martian surface. What it uncovered was stunning. Vast reservoirs of frozen water, just beneath the dusty crust. There were no lakes or streams, but the icy layers circled the Martian poles and extended toward the equator. Water not flowing, but hidden, locked away under the soil for untold ages. The question of habitability was beginning to find shape. Nothing definitive, not yet. But where there is water, there could be life. Or there may have once been. Meanwhile, the European Space Agency joined the momentum with Mars Express in 2003. Another orbiter with radar-sounding equipment that looked beneath the surface. Under dust and rock, the radar mapped layers of ancient deposits. Quiet discoveries that rewrote old assumptions. And all while the images continued. Canyons littered with landslides from long ago, mountains shaped by erosion, dust-covered plains etched with the uncertain scars of wind and time. The red planet began to feel less like an idea and more like a destination. Each new map, each topographic curve, each atmosphere scan, anchored Mars not in myth, but in measurable truth. The 1990s and 2000s saw the rise of something gentle yet monumental, a renewed sense of purpose. Scientists weren't only asking where we might go next. They were asking why, to learn, to understand, maybe even, one day, to return, waiting through those long silent years for the ones who would come, slowly, carefully, and willing to listen to what silence might teach. The winds of the Martian frontier had not gone silent. Spirit landed first. A blur of red dust, soft thrumming signals, and then silence. Then gently, motion. Small adjustments from a distant place. And Spirit found its footing on Mars. It touched down in a crater called Gusev, a place that, to earth-bound eyes, might seem quiet and still, but once it may have held water. Opportunity followed soon after, landing on the opposite side of the planet, a world away in Meridiani Planum. There, the land was smoother, open. It was chosen because it showed signs of hematite, a mineral that often forms in water-rich environments. 2 rovers, twin explorers, but each had its own journey to follow. Each carried the dream of unraveling Mars's hidden past. Spirit rolled out first. It saw dust devils spin across the plains. It climbed rocky slopes and traced ancient lava flows. Its wheels often caught on loose soil, but it carried on, patient and persistent, like a child learning, slowly, the story etched in stone. In Gusev crater, Spirit found rocks altered by water, silica-rich soil, formed where hot springs may once have bubbled through the crust. It wasn't obvious at first, but over time, with each signal sent back to Earth, that watery story began to take shape. Opportunity, meanwhile, had an easier start. It landed inside a small crater and began its work from the moment its panoramic camera spun around. Very soon, it struck scientific gold. Tiny spherical formations in the soil, nicknamed blueberries by the team back home. Not fruit, of course, but iron-rich concretions shaped in water long ago. It roamed to nearby craters, first Endurance, then deeper and older ones like Victoria Crater, and eventually it made the long journey to Endeavour Crater, a place with ancient clays that hinted at water more benign, more friendly to life. The terrain rippled with wind-borne dunes, The sunlight cast long shadows, and in that quiet, the rovers just kept going. Spirit struggled in time. It lasted far longer than its 90-day mission, climbing Husband Hill, getting stuck in sand, and eventually unable to angle its solar panels toward the warming sun. But it had already fulfilled more than was ever asked of it. It had survived dust storms, dropped into dells, peeked into cracks, and all the while added a chapter to the Martian tale. Opportunity carried on for years, wheeling past rocks layered like pages, taking images, running chemical scans, peering at the red soil with gentle curiosity. Its journey included wind-polished stones, meteorites that had arrived from deep space, and, at Endeavour, clay minerals formed in water less acidic than anywhere it had been before. The rovers were small, not grand machines of vast size or speed, but careful, delicate, tenacious. They climbed hills, crossed plains, looked skyward, and powered on with a calm, stubborn heart. Their discoveries reshaped how we saw Mars, no longer just a dry, rusted ball in the night sky, but a place where water once flowed, where chemistry danced in moisture long gone, where habitability might have been, if only for a time. And so, many called them the little rovers. That could, because against all odds, they could. And they did. They became symbols of curiosity, of endurance, of listening to whispers from a world so far away. As I think of Spirit and Opportunity, I picture them still, the other asleep somewhere in Perseverance Valley, tucked into soft dust, beneath stars so far and so familiar. For all they traveled, they stayed kind, small, and tireless, charting rusted plains and ancient watermarks. Just to bring a little more wonder, back home, by the time Curiosity touched down in Gale Crater, the world held its breath. This wasn't just another rover. It was a traveling scientist, a tool-laden explorer with one purpose: to study Mars not just from above, but from within. Layer by layer, stone by stone, Gale Crater was chosen for very specific reasons. Once an ancient lakebed, it held the promise of preserved secrets, records of water, climate, and perhaps signs of life long past. Resting gently beneath the Martian sky, one silent in Gusev Crater. Curiosity's descent to the Martian surface was a marvel of precision, a complex landing involving a sky crane, retro rockets, and gentle cables, all to ensure that this delicate lab on wheels arrived unharmed, ready for its slow journey across this silent terrain. And once it landed, in the heart of that crater rose Mount Sharp, a 3-mile-high mound made of sedimentary layers, stacked like the pages of a forgotten book, every layer telling a quiet story of a planet that once had lakes, rivers, and, maybe, something more. Curiosity began to work. It moved carefully across the basin, searching the land for samples, clues, possibilities. Among the first breakthroughs, organic molecules, not life itself, but the building blocks of it. In drilled rock samples from ancient mudstone, complex carbon-containing molecules were detected. Their presence hinted at conditions, long ago, that may have supported the chemistry seen in living things. These were not newly formed. They were old, preserved from a time when water flowed across the Martian surface, when the air may have been thicker, the climate less harsh. Scientists found sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and carbon, elements essential to life, tucked into the fabric of the Martian soil. In clay-rich targets like Yellowknife Bay, data told of neutral pH levels. An environment not too acidic, not too salty, just right for microbial life. Had any ever existed? Curiosity roamed with care, its wheels humming softly against the fine dust, analyzing with every stop, its onboard laboratory studying gases, measuring radiation. Inside the rover, a suite of scientific instruments quietly came to life. SAM, or the Sample Analysis at Mars, processed samples and examined their composition. Chemin, short for Chemistry and Mineralogy Instrument, identified minerals inside those rocks, each tool added to the jocks, each tool added to the picture. A tale of ancient habitability emerged. The robotic arm reached out, brushing rocks, drilling carefully, collecting powdered samples for onboard analysis. This place, once warm enough, wet enough, with the right ingredients, might have welcomed life. Microscopic, simple, but real. The quiet potential of a planet that, long ago, might have known something more than wind and stone. And in that silence, beneath reddish dust and rock, the clues started to gather, one by one, as curiosity made its slow, steady climb up the ancient layers of Mount Sharp. Each meter upward meant digging deeper into time. Curiosity didn't search for aliens or fossils. It searched for possibility. Into the once blue past of a now red planet, the land was open, silent, and waiting. In the wide basin known as Elysium Planitia, the InSight lander touched down gently onto the dusty surface of Mars. It did not roll across like a rover. It did not soar through the sky. It simply arrived and stayed still. Stillness was its strength, for InSight had a listening soul. It brought with it a seismometer, a small, dome-shaped device, carefully lowered onto the red soil. The arm that placed it worked with precision, pressing it gently into the ground, like a visitor laying a hand to the earth and pausing to feel its heartbeat. This device, named SEIS, was more than a tool. It was the first of its kind on Mars to truly listen, not to light or color or movement, but to the quiet trembling of a planet's inner life. With SEIS anchored and cradled against the shifting wind, its cover shielding it from dust and disruption, the waiting began. On Earth, seismometers react to tectonic motion, shifting plates and deep rumblings. But Mars has no plate tectonics. Day by day, and through long, cold Martian nights, the seismometer waited, listening. And then it began to notice. Faint quivers below, Mars quakes, small tremors, some delicate, like the creak of a house in the quiet hours, others sharper, as if something deep below had stirred restlessly. Over time, instead, it sings a slower, older song. The planet swells and contracts, cools and cracks, making tiny sounds that would go unnoticed to human senses, but not to CS. InSight collected hundreds of these events, each one a whisper from beneath the crust. Different types of quakes came to light, some gentle, rising slowly and falling again, others abrupt, perhaps caused by sudden fractures in the cooling interior. These sounds told a story of a planet still alive in its own slow way. The wind, too, spoke often. Tiny gusts swept across the plain, rattling dust, brushing gently against the instruments. InSight's other sensors listened to this wind, its direction, speed, and rhythm, painting a picture of Martian weather like a changing tide. Sometimes the wind was still for days, providing perfect stillness for measuring deeper quakes. Other times, it was restless, draping the lander in noise and faint vibrations. Yet in both silence and motion, the data flowed steadily. From the timing and strength of each quake, scientists on Earth began to draw a clearer picture of the Martian interior, unlike Earth, which has a thick, active crust and molten outer core. Mars offered something quieter. Beneath this crust lay the mantle, cooler than Earth's, yet still warm enough to flex and stir over long spans of time. And below that, the core, unexpectedly large for a planet of Mars's size, molten still, and likely composed of iron and lighter elements, each quake measured, was a clue. Each vibration a thread in the tapestry of planetary history. The crust was thinner than some expected, but not as uniform. Parts of it dense, other parts fractured. The absence of large quakes, and the directions their waves traveled, told how deep the crust reached, and how the layers below reflected or absorbed the seismic ripples. It was like reading a story written in echoes. And all the while, the wind played its own part. Not just as something to be avoided, but something to be studied. It spoke of pressure patterns, swirling dust devils, of energy across the surface. The lander even captured their sounds, a faint whooshing like a whispered breath across a microphone. Thousands of miles away, on another planet, and yet familiar. The mission continued quietly, not with grandeur, but with patience. With every data point, and every night that came and went over Elysium Planitia, InSight transformed the silence of Mars into something heard and understood. Listening is sometimes more powerful than speaking. And here, in this quiet place between stars, the wind and the ground could finally share their secrets. The dust of Mars is ancient. Its reddish grains have drifted across plains and craters for billions of years. It is a place of silence and stillness, where winds whisper, but sound never carries far. Beneath that vast and distant sky, something extraordinary happened. A small machine, no taller than a child, stood on spindly legs in the Jezero crater. Delicate, yet determined, it was named Ingenuity. A tiny helicopter, built not to conquer, but to prove that flight was possible in a place far from Earth. The air there is almost nothing at all. Less than 1%. The density of our own atmosphere, thin and cold, with only shadows to mark the passing of day. To fly in such a sky requires balance, trust, and a quiet kind of courage. Ingenuity held within it the efforts of many, but in the moment of flight it stood alone. Its rotors, slim and stretching, began to spin slowly, then faster, whirring at over 2,500 revolutions per minute. Such speed, just a push against an almost absent air. The Martian wind brushed lightly across its surface, and then it rose. For the very first time, the air of another world was stirred by a powered craft. Only about 10 feet into the air. Only about 10 feet into the air. Only for 30 seconds. But in that brief ascent, everything changed. Mars had known dust storms, meteors, ancient rivers flowing and freezing, but never flight. Not like this. Ingenuity hovered, steady and still. Lee beneath it, its own shadow gathered on the sandy floor. Above, a pale sun hung low in the salmon-colored sky. The moment was silent. No engines roared. No fanfare or celebration, just quiet spinning. Just quiet spinning. And a delicate dance with gravity. Bee flight on Mars doesn't rely on brute force. It relies on elegance, balance, W, and patience, W-A, and patience. Ingenuity touched back down gently, as if it had never left, but that small hop had changed what we thought possible. A proof of concept that would live on far beyond that single moment. Again and again, it would rise. Long past its expected mission, flying through alien skies, stretching its carbon fiber blades against the quiet. W-watch, W-watch, W-watt, W-watt, watching the landscape unfold beneath it. W-watt. It became an explorer in its own right, sending back silent postcards from a world few will ever touch. Each flight tested more than mechanics. It tested what it means to dare, to try something simple in a place distant and strange. Mars, with its pink twilight and drifting ice clouds. W-strange rocks spread like forgotten puzzles, winds that move like sighs. And now, the whisper of rotor blades grazing silence. Ingenuity was never meant to last, double-leaf guessed in a ready-made afterworld, but still, it flew. The ground beneath Perseverance's wheels holds quiet secrets from a time when Mars may have been alive in its own way. Long ago, where the Jezero crater now lies, a river once wound its way into a vast lake. That river, carved through Martian stone, moved silt and sediment and deposited it into a gentle delta, carrying not just sensors and code, but a spirit of gentle wonder, a reminder that even the smallest things can lift into the unknown and drift for a while among distant skies. These layers of mud and clay-rich earth hold memories of water and of the complex chemistry needed for life. Today, the rover moves carefully across this terrain, its instruments tuned to the silent whispers left in ancient sand. It is not alone in its task, but it moves alone, step by slow step, tracing a path mapped by orbiters above. Each rock it encounters offers a question to be answered, or perhaps simply pondered. The layering of fine sediment, the rounded edges of pebbles, the shifting colors just beneath the surface. These are the traces of Martian history, written without words, waiting patiently for discovery. One by one, Perseverance collects small samples at chosen sites where clays have formed, and minerals suggest watery origins. These cores of dust and stone are sealed in tidy tubes, each one set aside, for hands that may return one day and open them. Fossils, as we know them on Earth, are not expected here. These gases may provide a clue, a whisper of biology, or simply a mark of ancient geological processes. And yet, the search goes on, patiently, purposefully, not to prove anything swiftly, but to gather the evidence carefully, at a pace that matches the planet's own. Silence. The mission is designed for the future, for another craft to one day arrive, to collect these tubes and bring them home, from red planet to blue, from lifeless wind to human hands. That return may take years still, but in each prepared sample, there is the weight of hope and deep curiosity. Not hope for dramatic discovery alone, but the building blocks of life, microbial hints frozen in time, may rest within the clay layers of this delta. The instruments on board study textures, scan with lasers, and sniff the chemical trace of carbon and sulfur. This work is not merely for scientists of today, but hope in the quiet mathematics of data, the slow layering of understanding built across generations. Each sample is tucked into place, like a page in a book written in dust and archived across the crater floor. In the delta, the rover pauses at an outcrop called Enchanted Lake. Its surface holds signs of alteration by water, fractures filled with minerals, and clays formed in quiet stillness. It is here more tubes are filled, each filled container a tiny ambassador of Martian geology, waiting to tell its tale when the time is right. In these stones, in these mineral bands, there may live unanswered questions about what once stirred on this distant world. And so, perseverance continues, wheeling slowly around the fan shape of the delta, scanning, sampling, studying, not rushed by time, not hurried by expectation, but rather moved by the simple act of learning and by the long arc of exploration that stretches far beyond the horizon. In quiet rooms scattered across the earth, minds turn toward Mars, not merely as a distant dream or a red speck in the night sky, but as a destination, something tangible, reachable, and carefully, quietly planned for. The idea of sending humans to Mars is no longer science fiction. It is a slow-breathing conversation, a series of detailed intentions, outlined across blueprints, and whispered through deep space protocols. Human-tended missions are the gentle beginnings of that ambition. Rather than leaping straight into full colonization, planners propose visiting first, sending craft ahead to build out support structures, landing robotic systems to set up power, habitats, and stores of essential supplies. These missions wouldn't be long-lasting at first. A crew might stay for several months tops, then return to Earth while systems are evaluated. They call it a stepping stone approach, an embrace of small wins over uncertain leaps. The spacecraft to carry them is imagined cautiously, designed to be part spacecraft, part home, shielded from radiation, layered with compartments for life support, and designed to be self-sustaining. Dreamers and engineers imagine artificial gravity, perhaps created by rotation or by short intensive exercises from the crew. Life support systems must recycle water and air cleanly, minimizing the need to bring everything from Earth. Communication, delayed by minutes, will reshape how we stay in touch. Conversations won't happen in real time, so autonomy becomes essential. Crews will train deeply, not only in spacefaring skills, but in medicine, engineering, and psychology. The journey to Mars is not a simple trip. It's an orchestration of countless life systems working in harmony. And then there's the landing. Mars has less gravity than Earth, but more atmosphere than the Moon. Too much for a pure freefall. Too thin for parachutes alone. So entry, descent, and landing systems need to be fine-tuned, with retrorockets, heat shields, and targeted navigation to gently touch down. Once arrived, the challenge shifts from flying to surviving. Temperatures can fall dramatically, and dust storms may last for weeks. Radiation is a constant concern, so structures may need to be buried in Martian soil to offer shelter from the sky. Solar panels stretch across imagined landscapes, harvesting light during the long Martian days, storing energy for quiet, sunless nights. The goal, they say, is sustainability. Not just surviving the visit, but building knowledge that leads to living, even thriving. Food grows slowly in hydroponic bags, lit by carefully tuned lamps, matched to specific cycles of growth. Every resource is counted, used, and reused, Nothing taken for granted, everything designed with care. But perhaps the most profound piece of this journey is the question of return. Leaving Mars isn't as simple as lifting off and coming home. Fuel, created on the planet itself through chemical reactions, will lift astronauts into orbit, where return vehicles may be waiting. This chemistry of return is still in development, testing how we can use Martian resources to unlock tomorrow's journeys. Without that return capacity, humans could arrive, but stay indefinitely. An outcome no one seeks without utmost preparation. So the rhythm of missions must include both ends, the arrival and the safe passage home, measured across time and carried in the hearts of those willing to go, Gah! As I think about the dream of living on Mars, my mind slows and drifts. A world covered in red dust, dry, quiet, hauntingly beautiful in its silence. And yet, there are those who look at that dusty horizon and see home. Not a barren void, but a place to build, to live, to begin again. In these quiet corridors of planning, filled with data and possibility, there lives not just the dream of touching Mars, but of doing it gently, sustainably, and wisely, not in rushing wind or noisy fanfare, but in deliberate, thoughtful steps. Some designs speak of soft geodesic domes, translucent and layered, capturing sunlight during the day, glowing gently through the chill of night. Others explore the safety of the underground, habitats carved into Martian soil, using the land itself to shield from radiation and harsh temperature swings. Engineers and dreamers have imagined the first settlements, tucked into shallow craters or nestled beneath protective domes. The air outside is thin, sharp, and dangerous. But inside these habitats, warmth would bloom like spring. It is easier, gentler, to hide beneath the surface, where the cold winds never reach. Some plans use inflatable modules, anchored to the ground, wrapped in thick, layered fabrics filled with air, their forms adapting to the needs of early colonists. There would be silence, but not loneliness. Outside the habitat walls, regolith, that fine Martian dust, it could be shaped and hardened into bricks, using sulfur from the soil, melted down, mixed and pressed, then cooled into strong, solid forms. In time, entire neighborhoods could grow. From Martian bricks, earth-colored homes, rising from the planet itself. No need to ship every beam and bolt from Earth when the ingredients for a future lie all around. The dream is not just of shelter, but of life, sustained and growing. Greenhouses filled with clusters of edible plants, carefully balanced ecosystems sealed within glass or polymer, using melted ice from underground reserves, efficiently filtered, recycled, shared across every structure, every breath. Solar panels stretch like black sails over the dust, collecting precious sunlight, a soft hum of energy waiting to be spent. And always, a quiet harmony among machines, science and human will. There would be challenges, but also the slow wonder of progress. Each colony, its own heartbeat, pulsing gently in the emptiness, a rhythm of survival and community. Perhaps in some distant settlement, low hills will cradle a small town, its name borrowed from myth, or, from the dreams of those who built it, children would walk on red sands, under pink skies, with nowhere to go but forward. There would be laughter inside the walls, shared meals and long evenings, routines that begin to feel ordinary. In an extraordinary place, somewhere in the dust, they would carry the memory of Earth, but also a feeling of beginning anew, a second cradle for humankind, built slowly with patience and quiet determination, not a replacement but a companion. Mars would become not just a destination, but a home. Soft steps on alien soil, stories whispered. Between modules, gardens nurtured by careful hands. It all begins with an idea, cradled in the dust, lifted by time, and held in place by hope. As I look at Mars, inside, peaceful corridors would extend between living pods and growing areas. I often feel as though I'm also looking inward, not just out into space. There is something deeply reflective about the red planet, something quiet and ancient, and strangely familiar. The early explorers of its surface sent robotic voices across the void, searching through dust and stone for memory, for meaning. We found canyons deeper than Earth's, mountains mightier than Everest, dry riverbeds, frozen poles. Each discovery whispers fragments of a story, of a planet that perhaps once had warmth, motion, maybe even water flowing freely. That story sounds oddly like our own. When scientists first trained telescopes toward Mars, they weren't only seeking signs of life, they were searching for context, for a way to understand our place among the stars. Mars, in all its windswept silence, seems to echo our own journey. Looking at Mars is like reading the first pages of a book we're still writing here on Earth. It teaches us about climate, about geology, about time itself. But beyond science, there is something poetic in the echoes between us and that dusty sphere. Both worlds shaped by collisions and erosion, both touched by the sun's warmth, yet left to spin in their own seasons. Mars reflects a future that could be ours, a quiet warning wrapped in its quiet surface. If a planet once alive could grow still, what does that say about the one we call home? And yet, beyond the caution, there's something comforting too. That even amidst silence, there remains motion. Dust storms that dance, ice that expands and contracts, planted flags in data, and dreams in rock samples. As we did all this, we weren't just uncovering another world. We were uncovering ourselves. Mars shows how far we've come. And yet, how small we still are. Every grain of dust on that planet, carried by winds we cannot feel, is a verse in the poem of the universe. Tiny vibrations under the soil that remind us nothing is ever truly still. We slowed down satellites to orbit Mars, walked digital rovers through its ancient plains. Simple, timeless, patient. In its craters, we see the marks of events millions of years old. And we think of our own time here. So brief and yet so meaningful. Mars doesn't rush. It doesn't rage. It simply turns, alone but elegant. And somehow, this reminds me to breathe a little slower, to hold a little longer. The peace between thoughts. Through Mars, we remember that the universe is not only something to explore, but something to feel. It is less about going to another world than it is about connecting more deeply with this one, the red mirror, to our blue world, quiet, distant, and yet so very familiar. And so, as we drift now toward the quiet edge of our journey, I find myself looking once more toward the sky. Up there, hanging softly in the darkness, is Mars, quiet, steady, timeless. It does not call out loudly. It does not demand attention. It simply waits. A companion in the great hush of night. Throughout the chapters we've wandered through, there's been a rhythm, slow, curious, ever gentle, the rhythm of human wonder, a quiet question asked across the divide, answered not with certainty, but with awe. Every mountain on Mars, each dried channel and whisper of wind holds a fragment of a story, a thread that connects what we are to what we may yet become. It is strange and beautiful how soft our search can be. Not all exploration roars with engines or blazes in light. Some journeys unfold in silence, paced like the heartbeat of an idea. Mars hears those thoughts. I imagine it does. Not truly, of course, but in the hush of a starlit night. It's easy to believe it listens. There is peace in a mystery that waits patiently for us. Peace in knowing some questions will stay unanswered just a little longer. We often think of space as so distant, so apart from life down here with our trees and laughter and oceans. And yet, when I look up, it's a beacon. A whisper in the cosmic night, reminding us of our quiet strength to dream, to wonder, to reach with care. As you settle under your own sky tonight, let those stars be your lullaby, soft and steady. Let Mars drift across your thoughts like a warm red ember. I do not feel far from it at all. I feel gently held by something vast, something still, something kind. Mars is no longer a stranger, neither fading nor rushing, simply glowing, like you, here, in this moment, still curious, still calm, still listening. Thank you for joining me, for being part of this gentle story. Good night. And may your dreams carry you, wherever your wonder leads.